Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for this day. Pray that you'll bless our time together. Pray you'll comfort our hearts as we talk about some pretty heavy topics and try to understand the signs of the times and the things that are going on around us and see how they all fit together in your prophetic plan. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, the day is going to be get used to it. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. Just a reminder, some of the platforms that we broadcast on, YouTube, Fellowship Bible Chapel, just type in that or my name, and those things should come up. Vimeo, Remnant Truth Network. Try to get those uploaded the same day. Blog Talk Radio, Christian Sentinel has an audio podcast that you can look up. And then on Rumble, we're at Real FBC, and I think that's a little bit easier to find these days. We talk about each week the convergence of events and the disrupted world that we live in. I'm going to try to cover a lot of territory today. And as we get closer to the end, when Jesus finally returns and sets up his kingdom, there's a lot to go on before that we're told about. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus talks about, likewise also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. And delivered, in 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter fleshes out a little bit about Lot, and delivered just Lot, who was, look at what it says, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. And then a parenthetical explanation, for that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, it says, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good. Whoops. Yep, my other slide I accidentally deleted. Well, you can finish up the passage there, but listen, what Paul said to Timothy rings true today. In the last days, perilous times shall come. Now, the Greek word perilous there means essentially it can be hard to take. I think that's sort of descriptive of the conversations that I have with you, with friends, with others, that what we see going on, it's getting hard to take. Understand that this is what the Bible prophesied that the latter times would be like. And it would be like the days of Lot, where righteous people would be vexed, bothered by what they see going on. And it's a test in some respects. If you're not bothered by it, you need to check your heart. So today I'm going to look at some of the cultural things and then the Middle East. And I have a lot of material. I'm going to try to limit the cultural stuff to the first 30 minutes. So if you want to jump ahead about 30 minutes just to listen to the Mideast stuff, you'll be able to do that. I'll try to put a link somewhere where you can get to the different topics. But I try to break it down, and I always wrestle, do I start with the Middle East? Do I start with this cultural, societal stuff? So I'm gonna stick with the cultural stuff first. There are a lot of things that are going on that are they are converging, happening at the same time. And with regard to many of these, you could say that these are unprecedented. You hear all the time, I've never seen that before. I can't believe this is happening. Has this really never happened before? And the answer is that, you might find small pockets of it, but now it seems that it's happening everywhere, all over the world, all at once. That's different. And we live in a very integrated society. And there are things going on that have really changed the world. Here is one from a couple weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal. And I think the other one came from The Economist. China population, Beijing hoping for appropriate 2021 fertility level as demographic challenges mount. In the Wall Street Journal a week ago, baby bust effects could last for decades. Here's what one of the articles says. The drop has accelerated the general trend toward lower fertility rates, especially in developed countries. In Germany, the US, UK, and France, the total fertility rate, the number of children an average woman will have in their lifetime, is now below 2 and not expected to rise. In 2019, Japan's rate fell to 1.36. And non-Muslim population of Russia, which has a very rapidly growing Muslim percentage of its population, the birth rate of ethnic Russians, I believe, is about 1.1. Replacement rate is 2.1. That means that there will be half people born in this generation, which means that the populations will decline very rapidly. And they're declining very rapidly at the same time that the populations are aging, where they expect the younger populations to take care of them. It's destroying government pension systems. Some people can't see the way out. This is in the Wall Street Journal article. In December, South Korea's central bank suggested that the decline in the country's fertility rate in 2020 to, are you ready for this? 0.84. Already the world's lowest, would be lasting as delayed marriages led to permanent social changes and fewer children born overall. Japan and South Korea will lose massive numbers if the Lord tarries, they'll lose massive numbers of their population just because they're not reproducing. So the goal of some globalists that want to reduce population will be met just by people not having children. And that is really a stupid idea. But globalists love that. I mean, you hear all of them talking about it. Bill Gates and others want to reduce the population, reduce the population. Well, we'll see what the world is like when they get their wish, because it's coming. Naturally. And this has massive geopolitical implications. It's why France is so upset with the Turkish Muslim population in France, because they're reproducing at a rate above 3.5, and the French rates have dropped below 2. They're probably down around 1.3 or 1.4. That does not bode well. So the percentage of the Muslim population of France, and France is already saying that it's not compatible with our values. The French are complaining that something is not compatible with our values, mind you. This is a story for this whole COVID thing. This happened in Holland, Michigan, from the Detroit News Friday, or yesterday. Eatery owner jailed over COVID violations. The lady that owned a restaurant, she kept it open. She refused to close. She was open Friday morning at 5:30 a.m. when they came to arrest her and take her away. She is an immigrant from Poland, by the way. She fled communist Poland because she could see she didn't like what was going on there. The state of Michigan is oppressing the people and they've become tyrants. We can operate our businesses as we see fit. The First Amendment gives us the ability to petition grievance against the government, to assemble, and freedom of speech. All of these things here have been used against Marlena. She's currently in jail, and I believe will be in jail for over 90 days. Her jail term, my understanding is, can be extended until the Attorney General of Michigan decides that if she does close a restaurant, that she means to keep it closed. Now, do you think that they've suspended her property tax bills on the restaurant? This really is tyranny. This one bothers me. They've taken away her license. And so someone who fled Poland gets her. Some guy went into court to represent her, and because he wasn't really an attorney, he's now in jail for 93 days. That's Michigan. Can be there in 2 hours. There were protests all over the world yesterday. In the upper left-hand corner is Kassel, Germany. Upper right-hand corner is, I think that's London. Lower right-hand corner is the Netherlands. All protesting. People are just tired of the lockdowns. They're worse in Europe than they are here. They haven't done a very good job of rolling out their vaccines. You can say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they keep reinstituting the lockdowns. And the governments, if they're trying to vaccinate everybody, they've done a pretty pathetic job of rolling it out. The bureaucrats really don't know what they're doing. But we already knew that, didn't we? The lower left-hand corner is a place where there are no lockdowns, or there are no protests. That's Paris, which has entered a very strict lockdown for the third time. It's destroying the economy. I mean, this is the first day of spring. Usually people would be out by the thousands in Paris, walking the streets. There's virtually nobody out. There's also this push with the vaccine to come up with some kind of certificate to allow quarantine-free travel. Right now, some places like Canada, if you can get there, for example, if you're a Canadian citizen, you went to Florida for the winter and you try to come home, you will be quarantined for 3 days. You have to test negative for COVID before you leave to get on the plane. When you arrive, you will be tested and you will be then taken to a quarantine hotel near one of the, well, they don't know where, nobody really knows where these quarantine camps or hotels or whatever are. You're taken in buses with the windows blacked out. And you go to these places, you have to have another COVID test and wait for 3 days to get the result. And if it's negative, then you can go home and quarantine for 11 days. That cost for that 3-day process is over $2,000. It's sort of saying to the people of Canada, even if you're a citizen of Canada, don't come back. We don't want you. It's unbelievable. But there are these tech firms, an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, coming together to try to get a COVID pass that's secure, can't be counterfeited, and of course, protect the privacy of people. I don't believe that one. I don't have a slide from it. There's an article in the New York Times Magazine this morning. Now, whether you like the New York Times or not, the New York Times has done a pretty good job of expressing concerns about the intrusion on privacy that's coming from the big tech companies. And it talks about the cover article in the magazine this morning is a facial recognition company that has taken billions and billions of photos, processed them, and has a database that not just police agencies can access, but other people can pay to access, that pretty much has at least about half of the world's population facial recognition data that they can tell who that person is just by analyzing a photograph of the person. And sometimes they only get half of the face or something like that. I find it fairly frightening, as does the New York Times author. Like, what are we doing here? People have no privacy. It's really becoming a big problem. Here's something that's great for California. I don't understand. I mean, really, if you want to see Romans 1 in action, where God gives them over to a reprobate mind and where they lose the ability to reason, it's California and mainly the leadership, the political leadership of California. This is a bill introduced in the Assembly on February 12th, AB 655. It essentially says that if you're trying to become a police officer and you cannot be hired if you have belonged to a hate group. A hate group is not identified, not really well defined. What do you think the imbeciles that are in charge of California are going to do with that? It means if you're conservative, if you're supported the last president, you belong to the NRA or other organizations or even some churches, you're not going to be able to become a law enforcement officer. What I'm seeing, I get emails from people in the military, with family in the military, sometimes directly from people in the military, and there is a concerted effort on, I believe, to purge the military. Now, this started under the first and second Obama administrations, where they purged conservatives out of a lot of the top leadership of the military. It's getting worse, I believe, under the third Obama administration, what we call the Biden administration. It's very troubling. This judge in the in the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals, Lawrence Silberman, he's a Republican appointee, and they had a libel case that came up. And in the libel case, there was a case involving the New York Times many years ago. And essentially they said, I shouldn't use the word essentially so much. They said in that case, if you're a public figure, you can't recover for libel damages unless you can prove actual malice. The question then was whether the people who were subject to this online article were public figures. The majority of the court said, yes, they were public figures, and they don't prove actual malice, so that's how we protect freedom of speech. And Judge Silberman, picking up on an opinion, a minority opinion dissent of Justice Thomas at the Supreme Court level, said we really need to look at Sullivan versus New York Times again, that decision, because in this day and age, it's going to become more and more of a problem. Judge Silberman went on what many articles have said was a tirade against bias in the press, bias in big tech, deplatforming of people. I read the opinion. Everything he said was correct. Here's the copy of the opinion in the case of against Global Witness Publishing, Inc. The interesting thing is, so Hot Air, they talk about it, and they said, this is a problem. Judge Silberman has some good points about media bias, mainstream media bias. The lawyer, the Harvard lawyer that wrote the Politico article analyzing the decision, obviously lives on a different planet or some other realm of existence that I don't live in, because he says, well, what media bias? There's no media bias. There's no concerted effort to get rid of conservative voices. What is Judge Silberman talking about? Okay, so to the author of this, I can't remember his name, is, sir, he's talking about reality, and you're in denial. And so if you watch some of the mainstream media, what you'll see is they're talking about something completely different. And it becomes, I'll admit, it becomes very difficult to figure out what the truth is. But I'm going to talk a little bit about woke culture and its effect on the church and education. Then we'll get to the Middle East. But this is something that I find rather troubling. This is reported by the superb Daily Herald in Wheaton, Illinois. Offensive language prompts Wheaton College to revise plaque for slain missionaries. So now there used to be this plaque at the Erdman Chapel at Wheaton College or University. Go ye and preach the gospel. Well, here's what the plaque said. I'll read the plaque to you. Go ye and preach the gospel. This is about the 5 missionaries, 3 of whom were Wheaton alums, who went to Ecuador back in the 1950s. You remember the story. I was just a kid when it happened, but I remember it. I remember being told stories about it. Jim Elliott, Nate Saint. Go ye and preach the gospel, dedicated to the glory of God in loving memory of Edward Macaulay, president of the class of 1949, and James Elliott, 49, likewise an outstanding athlete and leader. Because of the Great Commission, Ed and Jim, together with Nathaniel Sate, who went there in 48, Roger Uterman and Peter Fleming went to the mission field willing for anything, anywhere, regardless of cost. And you know the story. They made contact with the Auca Indians in Ecuador. They went there and they were killed. Now, I'll explain that in a minute. They chose the jungles of Ecuador, inhabited by the Auca Indians for generations. All strangers were killed by these savage Indians. After many days of patient preparation and devout prayer, the missionaries made their first friendly contact known to history with the Aucas. On January 8th, 1956, the 5 missionaries were brutally slain, martyrs for the love of God. So that plaque has now been removed by Wheaton administration because it referred to the Indians as savage Indians. And therefore it is incorrect. It is not politically correct. It's not woke enough. And the plaque, they say, is going to be revised. I'm skeptical. I don't think the plaque will ever make an appearance again. Because, of course, describing the Indians as savages mean that you're racist, you're bigoted, you hate them. I can assure you a whole generation of missionaries rose up in response to this. In fact, Rachel Saint and others went to the Auca Indians and converted the whole tribe through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And missionaries went all over the world inspired by that. Not because they hated people, because they wanted to give them the good news of the gospel. But the woke culture cannot accept that the gospel of Jesus Christ is in any way acceptable. I think if you unpacked what these people really believe, and what I'm seeing, every week my box is full of information of what's going on by the woke saints. And I think if they could get away with it, they would do to Christians today what the Auca Indians did to those 5 missionaries back in 1956. I see it in the emails they exchange with people. It's all over the internet. And guys like a Harvard-trained lawyer who wrote that article about Judge Silberman act like, what are you talking about? There's nothing like that out there. People like that identify themselves as blinded. I talked about this last week, the California curriculum on ethnic studies. The State of California Board of Education voted this week, and I believe unanimously adopted the ethnic studies model curriculum. It's not mandatory in California, but, well, here's what one article said about this. Adopting the model curriculum today that is balanced, focused, and bold is an extraordinary test that may not please everyone, but facing our history is an uncomfortable endeavor and making landmark educational change is never easy, said Alejo, who is the Monterey County supervisor. The murders this week in Atlanta and a rise in violence against Asian Americans. Have you noticed that that's now the big narrative? Yeah, look, a white guy went and killed some people, the majority of whom were Asians in those massage parlor and other things. That guy should be given the death penalty forthwith. Quick trial, quick execution. So hopefully sometime in there he will repent and accept Jesus as his Savior. Does not mean that he should not suffer the full weight of the law. But then the narrative is that because you can call it the Chinese virus, you hate all Asians. This is nonsense. And when you go look up the articles about who's really committing most of these attacks on Asians around the country, you won't be able to find the truth. You have to really dig for the truth. It's not whites, my friends. I'm sorry. And it's civil rights groups that complain about Asians getting preference in colleges because they have such good scores. Well, who's creating the hatred against them? Good grief. I don't know that this one's going to be up on YouTube very long. The murders this week in Atlanta and a rise in violence against Asian Americans, along with the shooting deaths by police that spurred the Black Lives Matter movement, added even that's a lie. Go read Heather McDonald's book and dig out the statistics on that. Added a sense of urgency in passing what will be the nation's first ethnic studies curriculum. As one of several hundred public commentators given 1 minute of testimony said succinctly, more delay is more hurt. Jonathan Tubin at the Jewish News Syndicate, I believe it is, Jewish News Service, said this. Now, originally, there was a lot of anti-Semitic materials in the ethnic studies curriculum. It was removed. Jonathan says this in his article this week: the disturbing aspects of this teaching go beyond the trouble it makes for Jews. After all, California students are only required to take 3 semesters of English and 2 of math to graduate high school. But while subjects like biology, chemistry, physics, geography, civics, history, and foreign languages are merely optional, this ideologically tainted ethnic studies curriculum will be mandatory. Think about what this means for the future of a country in which important disciplines, including those that were once correctly viewed as essential for an informed citizenry and a democracy, are ditched in favor of lessons about prioritizing race and tearing down the country. And there is story after story right now. This is a story by Christopher Rufo about the largest school district in California. Last year, the Wake County Public School System, which serves greater Raleigh, North Carolina area, held an equity-themed teachers training conference with sessions on whiteness, microaggressions, racial mapping, and disrupting text, encouraging educators to form equity teams in schools to push the new party line, anti-racism. Some of these come from a group called Pollyanna. This is from the Pollyanna website. Our mission, this is what school boards all over the country are adopting, is using for guidance in instituting these things. Pollyanna says this: our mission is to advance systemic change by developing stronger communities. We do this through programs that enhance cultural competency, racial literacy, and equity practice. And I can tell you in every one of the articles I'm going to share for you about what's going on in education, every time the article is written, particularly City Journal is doing a great job writing about this, Christopher Rufo and others I'll mention in a moment. Every time they go to the school system and say, hey, can you explain to us what's going on here? How do you justify this? What's the response from every school board, every school system that's doing this, and from the companies that are pushing it? No comment. They won't stand up and defend what they're doing because they're apparently untouchable. So that's Wake, North Carolina. Here is a tremendous article. You should go look it up at City Journal, The Miseducation of American Elites by Barry Weiss. Now listen, Barry Weiss is Jewish. She is, I believe, engaged for a woman, but she is what I would call a classic liberal, and I think she gets it. Listen to what she says. She's talking about a couple schools, elite schools, one in Manhattan, one in Los Angeles where she lives. It's called Harvard Westlake, located, I think, out in Thousand Oaks, California. Tuition, $50,000 a year per student. Listen to what she says. The dissidents, they're upset with these programs that have been adopted, including this brochure that was sent home, Anti-Racism at Harvard Westlake School, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So she starts off her article with this. The dissidents people are complaining. But are they going to the school and complaining? No. Why are they not doing that? Because if they go, their kid gets kicked out of school, labeled as a racist, they're labeled as a racist, and the people at the school will go after them to destroy their lives and careers and livelihood. This is in one of the richest communities in the United States of America. It's coming. Unless it's stopped, it's coming everywhere. And people need to stand up against the mob that's forming. It's going to cost people. Listen to this. So this is Barry Weiss, hardly a conservative by she's liberal. She lived in New York. I think she was raised in Los Angeles. The dissidents use pseudonyms and turn off their videos when they meet for clandestine Zoom calls. They are usually coordinating soccer practices and carpools, but they now come together to strategize. They say they could face profound repercussions if anyone knew they were talking. But the situation of late has become too egregious for emails or complaining or conference calls. So one recent weekend, on a leafy street in West Los Angeles, they gathered in person and invited me to join. In a backyard behind a 4-bedroom home, 10 people sat in a circle of plastic Adirondack chairs eating bags of Skinny Pop. These are the rebels, well-off Los Angeles parents who send their children to Harvard Westlake, the most prestigious private school in the city. Now, unfortunately, they're doing it so their kid can get into Harvard, where the indoctrination that starts at Harvard Westlake can be complete and the kid can be radicalized. So it would be good if the kid was withdrawn, but if you withdraw him, he or she is labeled as a racist. You see this going on. The mob is coming after the kids. They don't care. Her article goes on. The parents in the backyard say that for every one of them, there are many more too afraid to speak up. I've talked to at least 5 couples who I say, I get it. I think the way you do, I just don't want controversy right now. They're all eager for their story to be told, but not a single one would let me use their names. They worry about losing their jobs or hurting their children if their opposition to this ideology were known. The school can ask you to leave for any reason, said one mother at Brentwood and other Los Angeles prep schools. Then you'll be blacklisted from all the private schools and you'll be known as a racist, which is worse than being called a murderer. One private school parent born in a communist nation tells me, I came to this country escaping the very same fear of retaliation that now my own child feels. Another joked, we need to feed our families. Oh, and pay $50,000 a year to have our children get indoctrinated. A teacher in New York City put it most concisely. To speak against this is to put all of your moral capital at risk. And it's happening. Here's a page from Grace Inclusive Language Guide for Grace School in Manhattan. Costs $57,000 a year, talking about the things that you can and can't say. It's 20 pages long to control what children say. I don't know if I referenced it before, Megyn Kelly used to be at Fox News. She has a podcast, and she was on Bill Maher. Bill Maher says, this is awful. Even Bill Maher is against it. So there's this very strange alliance. But Megyn Kelly says, look, my kid was talking about, my 5-year-old was talking about he needed to determine what color he was. And it's like, can he even learn to spell inclusive before you try to indoctrinate him? If anybody's going to do that, it's going to be me and Doug, her husband. So she withdrew her kids from that school, $57,000 a year each. This is one video that's linked by Grace Church, Deconstructing White Privilege with Dr. Robin DiAngelo. She is a woke racist. And interesting, I think it's her. She had a lot of information and people started complaining about the things that she was saying. So guess what? She took everything down off the internet. She won't even defend it. But she's still being used by schools to indoctrinate kids. Barry Weiss continues, I'm in a cult. Well, that's not exactly right. It's that the cult is all around me and I'm trying to save kids from becoming members. Barry says this, Barry Weiss, he sounds like a Scientology defector, but he is a math teacher at one of the most elite high schools in New York City. He is not politically conservative. I studied critical theory. I saw Derrida speak when I was in college. So when this ideology arrived at our school over the past few years, I recognized the language and I knew what it was, but it was a mutated form. The teacher is talking with me because he is alarmed by the toll this ideology is taking on his students. I started seeing what was happening to the kids, and that's when I couldn't take. They were being educated in resentment and fear. It's extremely dangerous. She goes on. I mean, get the article, City Journal, America's Miseducated Elites. It's pretty bad. The Federalist has this story. How writing a Federalist article put me on Chardonnay Antifa's cancel list. In October 2020, the author says, it's Ian Pryor, I believe is the name. I wrote an opinion article for the Federalist entitled, More Virginia Public Schools Using Kids as Guinea Pigs for Critical Race Theory. As a parent in Loudoun County, Virginia, one of the most affluent counties in the United States, I've become extremely concerned that Loudoun County Public Schools is being hijacked by rabid radicals eager to spend taxpayer money to indoctrinate teachers and students with critical race theory concepts. It's even coming into churches. I see pastors talking about it all the time. Hey, look at, Bernie Sanders, he does such a great job analyzing the economic problems. Praise the Lord for Bernie Sanders speaking at Liberty University. Liberty University, chapel, convocation. Look it up. Daily Wire picked up on this article. Loudoun teachers target parents' critical race theory hacking. What they have done is a group of teachers and administrators in the school have gone out to find out what parents are against critical race theory, and they have said, we want to destroy their lives, we want to have them lose their jobs, we want to get rid of their kids, and some have even gone so far to say we want to get rid of them. This is in Washington, D.C. suburb, my friends. Don't close your eyes. This is a mob. This is an article. This is from a quote by Daily Wire of what they said. This is a call for volunteers. This is what the teachers administrator organization that formed to go against people who don't like critical race theory. This is a call for volunteers to combat the anti-CRT activities of the PACT folks. I think it's people against critical theory. The Stop Critical Race Theory website and the like, looking for folks who are interested in volunteering to organize, lead, execute, and donate regarding the following points. 1, gather information, list of folks who are all in charge of the anti-CRT movement, infiltrate these groups, spread information about them, and in response to what they put out, and find a way to gather donations for these efforts. Volunteering is great, but these activities can be costly and not everyone has extra funds readily available. Anyone who's interested in this, please feel free to comment here. Here's a quote from somebody. Some of the emails were exchanged. I'm listing them this way: first name, last name, address, location. I'm losing any hope that remaining civil towards these people changes anything, she wrote. Avoiding these people isn't enough to stop the spread of their evil rhetoric. Anyone know any hackers? And this is some of the things. I looked at this last night. This is the Virginia Project. They had a video. They had a webinar. It's down. Why? Look at the bottom. Our apologies due to an active threat against PACT and the Virginia Project. This video is offline temporarily. These fools will not stop us or silence us. In fact, they are helping us explain CRT. So you can look it up. Look up the Virginia Project. Go to the Daily Wire article. There are links there. You can get, they have a primer on critical theory. I think it's very good. They define critical race theory. They tell you what it is. They give you examples of how it's manifesting itself. We talked about the Gates Foundation pushing curriculum, which teaches that math is racist if you insist on a correct answer, or you call on someone when they raise their hand. There are other manifestations of this. I mean, look at this. Biden's pro-transgender executive order spells the end of girls' sports. This is the stuff that they say is these are the people that have to be stopped. SUNY, State University of New York student suspended for Instagram post saying, "A man is a man, a woman is a woman." I've heard of people who posted something like that. Their employer's gone through their Facebook or other friends list and said, your friends list isn't diverse enough. You don't have enough LGBTQ people in your friends list. You're fired. I know this has happened. Here's another slide talking about Dr. Seuss. An article in the video on the BBC, should Jews count as an ethnic minority? You know, you would almost think that this is some kind of sick satire. So these are the things, and then in that thing is a resource page with hyperlinks. You can download the PDF. Here's what the Jerusalem Post article said this morning. You know, France has spoken out against this. We got to stop this. It's destroying our culture, our schools. You Americans, stay away. There's a Jewish man writing in the Jerusalem Post today, woke winds must be stopped at our borders. Historically, borders have been a major facet of Israeli life. A group of current and former teachers and others in Loudoun County compiled a lengthy list of parents. Members of a 624 member private Facebook group called Anti-Racist Parents of Loudoun County named parents and plotted fundraising and other offline work. Some used pseudonyms, but the Daily Wires identified them as a who's who of the affluent jurisdiction outside D.C., including school staff and elected officials. There's a strong need for us in Israel to stand up against this stuff, they say. Where is my cursor? I'm looking for my cursor. Where is it? Oh, there it is. There it is. It's not on my screen. That's the important one. You guys give me my cursor back. So this article says, listen, we got to stop this thing. Even Frederick Douglass, the great black freedom and advancement advocate, torn down. This is not ignorance, and it's not just a rebellion. Sissy fit. This represents a concerted effort to toss away the pillars of everything that embodies America. And you know what? He concludes with this. We need to keep these people out of Israel. Given this frontal assault and given the inevitable seepage that we will see through academia and some other areas of culture, the rest of us need to be aware, alert, and ever mindful of the scourge brought to our borders. One reason why the Europeans and others have such a hard time, well, I'll let you read the article. It's in the Jerusalem Post, either yesterday, Friday or today. Now, this is an interesting story. This is Berlin, Germany, and this area here is called, let me get my laser pointer. this area right here. You see the river? That's called Museum Island. One of the things on Museum Island is the Pergamum Museum. It's a massive museum. It's where they took the Zeus altar from Pergamum. Here's a video reconstruction. The Zeus altar there on the right platform, that was taken from Turkey to Berlin. It's in that museum. That was the inspiration for the Nuremberg viewing grounds. It was inspired Albert Speer, the architect for the Nazis, because of its grandeur. You remember the passage in Revelation? Pergamum, where Satan's throne is. That's it. It's now in Berlin on Museum Island. Now, the museum is closed, and the Pergamum wing, it just recently reopened, and the Pergamum wing is closed for another couple years. I suspect that the reopening of the Pergamum, the Satan's throne part of the Pergamum Museum, will be tied to this. This is a report from the National and the United Arab Emirates, where they already have the Abrahamic House of Faiths, a mosque, a synagogue, and a church in Dubai. Now on Museum Island, they're building this. It's called the House of One. This is from the barrier around the outside. 3 religions, 1 house. I suspect that Pergamum, I'm making a prediction, but I'm not a prophet. But I think that the reopening of the Pergamum wing of that museum will somehow coincide very closely with the opening of the House of One in Berlin. Speaking of one, Pope Francis has a new book out called The God of the Whole World. We must save lives, not build or destroy them. Just a couple quotes from this interview that came out this week. Not widely reported, but it's at Vatican News. In life, there are moments of darkness. Too often we think that they only happen to others and not to us, to someone else in another country, perhaps on a distant continent. Instead, we all ended up in the pandemic's tunnel. The world will never be the same again. But it is precisely within this calamity that we must grasp those signs which may prove to be the cornerstones of reconstruction. Speeches are enough to solve emergencies. The pandemic is an alarm signal on which humanity is forced to reflect. This time of trial can thus become a time of wise and far-sighted choices for the good of humanity, of all humanity, and essentially says, this is what we can use to build the new world order, to effectuate the Great Reset. We can heal injustice by building a new world order based on solidarity, studying innovative methods to eradicate bullying, poverty, and corruption. You think he has the Loudoun County anti-racist people in mind when he says this? No, that's who he would go and league with. So let's look at the Middle East. 10 years this week is the anniversary of the start of the Syrian civil war. Syria is still in massive destruction. We call it a country because we like to pretend that it still is, but it's not. And the cost to rebuild this will be I've seen the pictures. They talk about, 50 billion or 100 billion. I don't see how they can do it for that. I think it's in the trillion or 2 range. And Syria has no economy. How are they going to pay for it? This was a find that was, I think I mentioned this during my talk, first hour, about a great archaeological find down near the area of the Dead Seas. What they did was they took the initiative and they used drones and other things to map out all of these caves. There are 600 of them or so. And then they decided which ones would be best to explore. This one was called the Cave of Horror because you had to rappel down the side of a 600-foot cliff, about 80 feet down the side of a 300 or 600-foot cliff to even get into the cave, then do your work down there in the hot, dry desert. But they did find really the best find of biblical text in 60 years. The interesting thing about the biblical texts is they're in Greek, They're Zechariah, Nahum, and some of the minor prophets. They're in Greek, except for where God's name is mentioned, that's in Hebrew. So it's kind of an interesting find. And there's this article from the Israel Hayom Daily. And so they're analyzing those. This is just an interesting article. Drew's village of Majel Shams in the northern part of Israel used to be part of Syria. They talk about in 20 years, everyone in the Golan Heights will probably be Israeli. So there's an ethnic change that's going on. The villages are split between Syria, in some cases, half in Syria, half in Israel. And this has been going on now since the Six-Day War for over 50 years. Just some random things. WHO's hunt for COVID origins. They went to China. They thought they were going to get cooperation. Now they come back and say, originally they were saying, well, it has nothing to do with China. It has nothing to do with the lab in Wuhan. And now they're saying, well, maybe it did, but we can't find out because China won't talk to us. You got to really be careful with China. They're moving into Israel. They're managing the port of Haifa. There are agreements between Israeli tech companies and Chinese companies. One of the reasons why these things were tried to be stopped back during the Bush or the Trump administration was China takes that technology and steals it, and then they will sell chips in devices that have sort of a back door to take data and intellectual property and that sort of thing. This is well documented. Let's see. This is increasingly a conflict area. The GERD, it's giving indigestion to Egypt. The dam is being filled. They're threatening war. Sudan and both Egypt are threatening it. The dam is about a third full. It'll take another 4 or 5 years to fill it. Egypt is very upset. They rely on the Nile River greatly, although it's interesting when you look at a map, Sudan's not happy about it either. Of course, when you look at a map, there's a big dam in Syria, and there's the Aswan High Dam in Egypt that have big lakes behind them. So I guess it's okay for them to dam up the Nile, but not for Ethiopia. Very, very difficult situation. I won't read too much of this. This is Caroline Glick's article in Israel Hayom on Friday, talking about, it's titled, Abdullah the Irrelevant of Jordan. I love the way she writes. I really do. I mean, she says it, and she says, look, nobody cares what Jordan thinks anymore. Jordan is foiling, trying to make itself relevant. Jordan now has a massive problem. They had, I think, 9 or 10 people die in hospitals with COVID because of lack of oxygen. So the king has there's a lot of demonstrations going on in Jordan. So watch that. That's a country, it's the area of Jordan. When you talk about Daniel chapter 11, that area is delivered out of the hand of the Antichrist when he rises to power. I'm not sure exactly how that happens. Also, so that's a big issue. And she says, look, everything that Abdullah does just shows he's irrelevant. And again, I could show you example after example of him speaking at international conferences and saying, look, he never mentions the Jewish ties to the Holy Land. He just refuses to do that. Well, the way he's going, he may not have much going on. This article from Haaretz, it came from a Hebrew language newspaper in Israel. And it talks about the fact that the Iranians are noting that there are a large number of attacks on their ships throughout different shipping areas in the Middle East. I might have a slide on this a little bit later. But this has cost Iran in the billions of dollars. Ships they're not destroyed. Nobody's died in these attacks. There are strange explosions. The ships become disabled, and Iran has to go and tow them all the way back to Iran from the Mediterranean. Not an easy job. And they're claiming that this is Israel that's doing this. So it's leading, as it says here in the headline, billions of damage, dozens of Iranian tankers attacked. And nobody seems to know who's doing it. So now I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on Turkey. There's a great organization called Impact-SC. You can look up their website. And what they do, I'll reference some of the things they did with Palestinian textbooks in a moment, but this is their analysis of textbooks, the curriculum that's changed in Turkish schools under Erdogan. It's become, long story short, it's become highly Islamic and anti-Israel. Here's a page from that report. It says this. It talks about how the Turks want to restore their empire. Down here at the bottom it said the Turks' red apple ideal, I think I talked about this a few months ago, is not a constant and definite concept, but is best understood as an intangible ideal. Therefore, each period's culture determined the red apple of that cultural framework, and each period a certain goal is chosen as that period's red apple, which would in turn guide Turks to accomplish their objective. In the case of a success, then a new red apple would be determined. So this red apple concept is coming to the fore. This is an article written by an Iranian author, and it is titled Erdogan's Eurasian Dream. She picks up on this red apple thing. This is a translation. The term red apple, which in Turkish mythology means the ultimate goal, is a symbol of a pan-Turkic movement that aims to unite Turks in every corner of the globe to achieve global supremacy. And what has happened, there's been large amounts of Turkish immigration into Europe, France, Germany, Netherlands, so much so that when Turkish campaigns happen for national political office, those places are often targeted because there's so many Turks living there. So this is where they get a lot of their power from. There was a segment on 60 Minutes about the Gulen movement. Now Gulen and Erdogan used to be pretty close, but Erdogan doesn't like Gulen. Now Gulen lives in the Poconos here in the United States. He's very elderly, very frail. But under his auspices, they had started Turkish private schools throughout the United States that were focused on science and technology. But they were also Islamic in their orientation. So this is how they're doing this through the schools. The concept is at the heart of Turkey's expansionism. The head of the Turkish Presidential Institution's Communications Organization said in a tweet, you see it there on the screen, "For us, the red apple means a strong, great Turkey and a symbol of our nation's happy progress." 1071 to July 15. July 15 is 2016 when they had the failed coup. The red apple is like a huge tree that is shaded from Gibraltar to the Hejaz, from the Balkans to Asia. The point is that the Seljuks, who are the Ottoman predecessors, defeated the predominantly Greek forces of the Byzantine Empire in 1071 and opened the gates of Anatolia, the Anatolia Peninsula, to the Turks. Hejaz is what they're saying is, this is the area in Saudi Arabia, the region of Hejaz, that includes Mecca and Medina, and they want to take that back. So this is what's driving a lot of what's going on. Erdogan used this video. This sort of shows what they're doing is they're showing ancient Turkish forces and modern Turkish forces to see how we're just carrying on the great achievements of the taking back the Anatolia Peninsula in 1071. And then you will also see that they take the leader, at least in this video, The promise of divine light, that's Mecca, Medina right there, it would be forever. Only the victory of the red apple. It would bring peace to the earth. It would bring peace to the earth. We are coming to every corner. This is a music video that they put up with love of homeland. And then you'll see what they'll intersplice is here. Let the sounds of Allahu Akbar rise to the throne. Let the sound of Takbir Allahu Akbar rise to the throne. Turkish military guard trench. Honor of our hero land. And then you'll see they'll intersperse this person walking towards the Hagia Sophia, interspersed with someone else walking towards the Hagia Sophia. So this is the propaganda that the Turks get filled with, and the education system is filled with. And you'll see here where the ultimate goal ends. There's the leader. The first sultan of the world. To the sultan of this generation. This is how Erdogan sees himself. You need to understand that. Here he is. There's the Hagia Sophia. Comes the leader walking. Here he comes again. You see how the way they're using the imagery there to build up Erdogan? Well, anyway. And then there's all sorts of things. This was tweeted out. You see here the sort of the tie of the past to the future and the red apple in the background. That's how it's used. This is Erdogan who had tweeted this himself. Here's a speech that Erdogan gave. And so you see this happening. There's this, back in August, I played parts of this clip where he was talking about we're going to defend our East Med rights. That's what the headline said, but when you analyze the speech, what he's saying is, listen, we're the red apple. We're going to take back from Gibraltar to the Hijaz, to Central Asia. That's what we want to take. And so this Iranian author who analyzes this, the geography embedded in the concept of the red apple refers to the vast area from southern Europe to Central Asia in which Turkey pursues an active foreign policy. And I think this has a lot of prophetic implications to it. Here's an article from Geopolitical Futures that talks about Turkey pushing to the east. Turkey sits in this area that's really the crossroads between Central Asia and Europe. So it's a very important area. Erdogan did an editorial this week let's put it this way. No sooner did this article appear saying, watch out for Erdogan, than Bloomberg had an op-ed posted by Erdogan himself. The West should help Turkey in Syria's civil war. And essentially says, hey, we're going to help settle Syria if you just follow along what I, as the great leader of the Turkish Neo-Ottoman Empire, have to say. The red apple is rising. And this is what Erdogan says. So you need to pay attention to Turkey. Whether it's under Erdogan or somebody else, I don't think this goes back. And then you see them making this push for peace. They say, well, we've made an arrangement on the East Med with Israel, and we've got one with Egypt. And that's not true. Erdogan is not making peace, and this is the editor of a pro-Egyptian regime saying, look, there are 10 things that Turkey has to do before we'll even sit down and talk to him. And one is, stop this nonsense about the Eastern Mediterranean. So this article, Impact SC thing goes back and says, look at this is Erdogan. What he does is he portrays himself as the victim. You can see the globe there where he has all the areas of Turkish influence. He wants this whole area. And this guy there's example after example after example. Here's one. This is Erdogan 12 years ago at Davos. And he wants to speak.
With apologies to
His time is up. 1 minute.
Well, 1 minute.
He's sitting next to Shimon Peres. And Peres has defended Israel. And this has upset Erdogan because Erdogan uses the Palestinian thing as his thing. And he goes into this tirade. And eventually, the long story short of it is that he gives up. He essentially gets up and walks out. A couple of years, this is a few years ago, he was where, and he says in his speech there with Theresa May, Israel will not be forgiven. When Trump came out with his peace plan, Erdogan got up and was giving speeches saying Jerusalem is not for sale. And if I'd played that Red Apple video all the way to the end, you would see that it ends with a picture of the Temple Mount. That's what the ultimate goal is, and that's what Erdogan is doing. We have Biden say he's tripping over his own foreign policy. He fell up or down the stairs of Air Force One. But there's a new memo that's come out. This was reported by CBN and other news outlets, the National News also, that there's a memo that the National News and Dubai got a hold of that said we're going to reset everything with the Palestinians. This is delusional. This is an editorial from a few weeks ago in the Friday Jerusalem Post. Palestinian lies, American delusions. Again, Impact SC did an analysis, I think I mentioned this a couple times before, of UNRWA, UN Rights Watch Association. This is materials they produce. They would say, well, we agree the Palestinian textbooks for kids are just awful. They're anti-Jewish, anti-Israel. But these are the ones that they produced that Impact SC looked at. And what you'll see is that it's very pro-Palestinian. And so it says here, read the following sentences, then write the colored numbers and numerals. The length of Jerusalem's walls, the number of schools in Palestine, the number of martyrs in the First Intifada. You see how they are indoctrinating the kids with this? Then here's a picture of Palestine, right down on the map of Palestine, the following cities, Jerusalem, Gaza, Beersheba, Jericho. All of these, and there's no Israel, it's Palestine. There's no borders anywhere indicating the nation of Israel. And it talks about the Arab partition before, the Arab homeland before partition. Caroline Glick has an article on her own personal website where she talks about this, and she says, remember the destruction of the wall up at Mount Ebal a couple weeks ago near the altar of Joshua? Very significant historical site, and they intentionally destroyed the wall. What they said was, this is Mount Ebal on the right, Gerizim on the left, Shechem in the middle. This is where the children of Israel, the curses were shouted on Mount Ebal. This is what happens if we don't keep the commandments of the Lord. And on Mount Gerizim, the blessings. Mount Gerizim is where the Samaritans still have a village. About 700 of them still remain. They practice Torah. That's all they practice. Here's a picture of Joshua's altar. So what the Palestinians said was, look, we didn't intentionally do anything to Joshua's altar or the area around it. We were just trying to get rocks for the road we're building. Now, look, if you've been to Israel, what do you know? What is the one thing that's characteristic of Israel? Is a lot of rocks. I mean, rocks everywhere. So I guess they just couldn't find them anywhere else. So they had to take out about a 200-foot section of this wall around Joshua's altar. And what they're doing is they're destroying the archaeology of those sites. Caroline, great article at her website, carolineglick.com. Lebanon is falling apart. Its currency has reached an all-time low. It's like tens of thousands of lira to the American dollar when it used to be like 50 to to the dollar. Now it's like 12,000. Their economy's falling apart. The government's not working. And Lebanon could become a failed state. And so this article, the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, by retired Brigadier General Shimon Shapira, says, look, the collapse of the Lebanese state could result in Hezbollah's takeover of the government in Beirut. And what he uses a picture in a starting off point is early this week, a delegation from Hezbollah went to Russia and was warmly received. And it becomes apparent that Russia has been funding a lot of what Hezbollah is doing. And Israel does not like that. Here's an article, I think this is at jns.org. Moscow and Hezbollah confirming the political post-military victory in Syria. It was not a meeting to demonize Hezbollah in Moscow. It was to build them up. At the same time that that's happening, I'm just going to go through this stuff very quickly because a lot going on in the back. So they have an Astana process. That's a city in Kazakhstan. Astana, I believe is how you say it. That's to set up a constitution for Syria. That's run by Iran, Turkey, and Russia. The U.S. has been excluded from that process. They haven't made much progress because Syria won't cooperate. So they've got this problem with, so now what Russia has done is they've gone and they've now added Qatar to the list. So they had a big meeting in Qatar this week with the foreign ministers of Russia on the right, Qatar in the middle, Turkey on the left, and they're going to try to restore peace in Syria. They're going to work in conjunction with the Astana process. At the same time that's going on, one of the lead generals of the defense force of the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says that we're going to unleash all kinds of missiles on Israel. That's our goal. They've taken over this ancient fortress in Syria where they're actively building a base, essentially, for Iranian operations. Now, why do they do this? Because they think that the West is timid enough not to attack them if they're in an ancient archaeological significant place. An IDF general at a conference in Jerusalem this week said that Israel could be hit by 2,000 missiles per day in a future war. Iran, this is from Arab News and the Iranian newspapers, they've introduced a missile site, which is essentially what they call an underground missile city. And you see here, it's peppered with posters for martyrs. You'll see a poster right here coming up. These are like missiles, and with the development of satellite technology and guided missile systems, these missiles pose an increasingly difficult problem for Israel and even for us should Iran try to unleash them here. So here you see the poster of the martyr Soleimani coming up. And these are underground tunnels in Iran, and you'll see there's hallways down the side that are full of these missile. I mean, they seem like they're getting ready for something, does it not? This is the video they released. Now, it's possible those could all be fake, but I don't think so. Go ask the people at our base in Iraq that were attacked a year ago whether those are fake missiles. And so now we also see that there's this growing Russia-Turkish-Iranian triangle. This is from Geopolitical Futures. But Israel is developing some very interesting weapon system. They talk about a sort of a boost in the Iron Dome. The problem right now is the drones are cheap, the missiles are relatively cheap, and they can shoot a swarm into another country. And it's hard for even Iron Dome and other highly advanced missile defense systems to handle these. But here's a picture. This is an interesting video that was put out by the Israeli people here this week with a test of Iron Dome. And you'll see they fire off these drones or these rockets. This is development of missiles in the field. So those are missiles to attack. This is Iron Dome firing off. It's like shooting a bullet in midair. And this is pretty amazing technology. So it's the same with drones or missiles. They have to analyze the trajectory and everything. And what they were showing was that Israel, that at least to a certain amount of swarm, here are the drones getting shot off, and the missiles are going to attack them. Cruise missiles are a different topic because they fly very low to the ground and fast, and that's difficult for even the radar the systems like the Iron Dome to pick up. So here are the drones. Boom, boom, boom. It looks like a video game, but this is real stuff. So anyway, they're developing things. I'm not going to play this video. This is a video that's 10-year anniversary of an anti-tank defense system that really is saving a lot of lives that Israel has developed. There's just a lot of these things being released. There's a thing here they call the digital generation takes charge of the new Ghost unit, flying drones and that sort of thing. Here's another article from Israeli newspaper about the attacks on the Iranian ships. And again, nobody's being killed, but the ships are being disabled and having to be pulled back. Article on front page, Jerusalem Post on Friday about Israel is yet to recover from the Natanz explosion that we talked about a couple months ago. Israel's also developed some pretty good tank technology called Iron Sting. Here's a little example of how that works. This was also released this week. This is all, they use drones, they use this ground radar, and they're trying to use mortar shells, which tank commanders love. And you can see that they can now fire these things, and they're pretty precise. And this is Israeli military technology. And they have a target, and you can see that they're hitting they're putting that missile pretty much where they want to. Very interesting stuff. Part of this development has come about is because Iran has developed these Quds Force, and they're very loosely organized. They're spread among the populations, and they train a lot of them. Because they have a lot of people out in the field. So they have these big training bases that they've developed all over Iran, even right in the city of Tehran. So just a couple more things. Here's again, this is an article from the Jerusalem Post and the Hurriyet Daily News in Turkey. Turkish and Iranian diplomats are meeting in Iran, Russia, and Turkey. A good article from Seth Frantzman that they're growing in their alliance. This is Bible prophecy working itself out. Now, one quick thing here. Jared Kushner wrote an article, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on Monday. Opportunity beckons in the Middle East. One of the things he says, though, he talks about how wonderful he was in putting together these Abraham Accords and that type of thing. But then he mentions this. And this is sort of like, I don't know why he said this, but I think it might reveal what he's really like. The Biden administration, he says, however, has one asset that the Trump administration never had, a relationship with Iran. While many were troubled by the Biden team's opening offer to work with Europe and rejoin the Iran deal known as the JCPOA, I saw it as a smart diplomatic move. The Biden administration called Iran's bluff. Well, Melanie Phillips, in a way that only Melanie Phillips can do, calls this Jared Kushner's curious change of heart. And she concludes her article. She criticizes him because in that article, op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, Jared said that, well, the Palestinian-Israeli thing is really just a real estate dispute. And Melanie says this, a real estate dispute? But the conflict was a war by the Arab world against Israel's very existence. Its presentation as a real estate dispute is what's been the actual myth. That indeed was the fiction promoted by the Palestinians to guilt the West into believing that a Palestinian state would solve the conflict. This propaganda achievement, which has been fueled fueled the West animus against Israel, evilly repackaged the Arab war of extermination against Israel as a Palestinian struggle for land. This was the delusion that enabled the Palestinians to play the West for suckers by holding out a land-based compromise to which they had no intention of agreeing. It was this myth that was shattered by the Abraham Accords. Although this article praised Trump for his breakthrough in the Arab world, he was effectively praising himself, attempting to bathe his opinions about Iran in the reflected glory of the Abraham Accords. His op-ed can only be seen as a shallow, unprincipled, and disloyal job application to the Biden administration. He has strengthened Tehran and enfeebled America, and now Jared Kushner has become his cheerleader, Biden's cheerleader. What a betrayal. Jason Greenblatt says, listen, we did do a lot of good work trying to get these accords between Israel and these Arab countries. I personally have concerns about where they will ultimately lead. And essentially he says, look, I'm willing to help the Biden administration, but nobody's picked up. Everybody's got my phone number, but nobody's called. And they don't understand. We have a huge file. We had a small team. Nobody's bothered to call because the Biden administration has a different agenda. Article on geopolitical futures, no peace for the Middle East. Looks at how China's moving in, how this change with the Arabs has been a big change, but there is the Russia, Turkey, Iran issue. I showed you a page of this article. And essentially it says, listen, Iran, Russia, and Turkey have different interests. They'll work together for a time, but then their coalition is probably going to fall apart. Finally, we'll end with this. Elections in Israel on Tuesday. This is the front page of Israel Hayom on Friday. There's some scenarios it looks like it's going to be a 60-60 tie. You know what that means? Another round of elections. Netanyahu's running around 30. He can get a couple parties with him, the Orthodox Jewish parties, United Torah, and pick up a couple, and he's probably at over 60. But nobody knows what they're going to do. Naftali Bennett, Yamina, and Gideon Sar at New Hope, former Likud, both of them former Likud, have said they won't join a government with Netanyahu. Don't know where it's going to happen. I'm not a prophet. I was listening to some analysis of this morning, and nobody knows what's going to happen on Tuesday. People would like to have a government for a few years rather than 6 months. This will be the fourth election in 2 years. It's torture. It's part of his campaign. Netanyahu has intimated that he will have direct flights from Tel Aviv to Mecca. The political aspects of this are very concerning, and we know where this all ends prophetically. So there are things to be concerned about the way everybody is pushing this, and the economic aspect is so big. So that's a brief summary review of a few things that are going on in the world. Had enough? Look, it's an interesting time to be alive. All of these players are actively operating, but I want to go a little bit deeper into some of the motivation, what's driving Turkey and some of these other countries, because I think you need to understand that at the heart of it is this anti-Israel feeling, belief, and desire to destroy Israel. And so they'll make a good public appearance, but when you look back at their old videos or writings and that type of thing, it's really, they want to get control of Jerusalem. That's prophetic. That's what the Bible says will happen. So let's pray, and we'll pick this up next week. Father, thanks so much for your word. Lord, I pray that you will give us the strength and power, guided by your Holy Spirit, to stand in an evil day and to stand up against the mob. But always remember that we are to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's really the only hope for the world. But also understand that there are things that need to be done to protect our children and our families and our grandchildren from the evil that is present at almost every level in our country now. We pray that you'll give us the strength to stand in your Holy Spirit and power against that, knowing that ultimately the only hope for this world is the return of Jesus Christ to set up his kingdom, and that our obligation is to prepare the world for that. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.